gang. Here with my two sidekicks. I'm still getting through this sinus issue that I have every year. It's just really rough this year, so I apologize in advance for any raspiness or, anything like that. I'm sorry. But this should be a video that if you're at work or you're having your coffee that you can just turn on and maybe listen to. This is a topic that I posted in the community tab to see which topic y'all wanted to cover first. And I thought it was important. Not only is it a part of my own personal history, which again obviously ties into the topics that people cover, their own biases always enter in. So it's important to know who you're getting your information from as well. But regardless, I try to make this our channel, and I know I share a lot on the community tab, but there really is, if you're going to be watching or listening anyway, there really are some interesting nuggets of wisdom and truth out there. Sometimes they're being sold as fiction, and it might benefit you to learn from a different perspective sometimes. And so in that line of thinking, the topic voted on was that we wanted to look into or learn more about how Native Americans, how the original first Americans, I think, at this point our history is muddy, but I believe the Native Americans, the indigenous ones, obviously indigenous means originals first, tribes here, how they viewed eclipses and what they thought. Now, their creation stories vary, but they are so interesting, and there's always a moral lesson of some kind in there, and there is a visible hierarchy. It might just take, again, you looking from a different angle than maybe you've looked before. And how can this help us if we're not Indigenous Americans ourselves? Sometimes going back to the root, tracing things back to the root, we are better able to understand why we are doing things and learning the things and indoctrinated in the ways that we are today. And sometimes the first ways were closer to being quote-unquote right or correct. But as well, some traditions need to change, because if you learn and evolve the way we're supposed to, we should be setting down things that aren't helpful to us. And yes, even dark things can be helpful to us, because without the darkness, we would not know that there was light. We wouldn't be able to see the light if there wasn't darkness sometimes. So there is a place for it, right? But that doesn't mean we should get lost in it. All right, so let's get started. First, let's check this out. All I typed in was Native American, Indian, Indigenous, and eclipses. And so it says here, in Navajo, Dene, if I mispronounce, I apologize, tradition, the eclipse marks a sacred time. Annual or total solar eclipses, the sun, solar meaning sun, and even partial ones can leave lasting memories of the phenomenon, as well as the people and places where we experience the celestial alignment. So thank you for being here. I can turn the comments on, but if they get unhelpful or anything like that, I have no problem turning them off. I don't really believe in censorship personally. I think we should have the discernment to decide what we can take in and what we should not allow ourselves or our children, for example, to take in. But the comments will always be turned on after the video posts, if nothing else. All right, so we'll start there with the Navajos. Now, what do Indians believe about eclipses? We're just doing really basic here in the beginning. Much like when you're writing a paper, you'll see the intro and you'll cover all the little things. And then in the actual body of your essay, you get in deeper into those same topics. And a lot of people think there are two creationary stories in the Bible. I don't think that as of right now. Again, I think that we are going over the basics first, and then when you get into the body, you get into explaining the things that you've already mentioned or listed. You get into those same things, but in a deeper way, right? So what do Indians believe? Solar eclipse has a great religious significance in Hindu religion. Eclipses are not considered an auspicious event, and it affects the energy of sun and earth also. the rays of the sun become inauspicious. So that's Hindu. We're kind of trying to stick with Native Americans for now, because these eclipses have gone straight through America. And so we want to know the history of how they were viewed and what people thought of them. Oftentimes we will think, in our day and age, with having so much information at our fingertips, it can make us arrogant and think, well, these people who lived long ago, they were so primitive and ignorant and they knew nothing. They knew so much more than us, but it didn't have to be written down in books. They passed it orally, and unfortunately, because of that, things get lost. But also because of that, people had more skills. These skills were passed on from person to person. Like, for example, making bread or flatbread out of corn and wheat and barley, and just sitting there and grinding them all day. This is what women did. And meditating on the creation stories, perhaps, that they had. That's what I would have been doing. And of course, thinking about my children and, the love that I wanted to pour onto them that day. For example, we're trying to put ourselves into someone else's shoes, because it can be helpful. And sometimes our viewpoints are wrong, and sometimes we are the ignorant ones, and sometimes we are the monsters or the beasts. It's very important to remember that, much like the story of the light wolf and the dark wolf inside of people that comes from Native Americans. Now, let's be clear, too. Culture affects faith. What do I mean by that? Your culture is the area, the demographic, the ethnicity that you grow up in, geographically. All of those things play into your personal culture, right? Just because they use different words than us today, or because their rituals look a little different on the outside than ours. For example, I was raised Catholic, but I understand that the opulence and the luxury having to do with some part of that lifestyle is the part that is the chaff, is the part that needs cut off. I realize that, right? And I also recognize in the Native Americans that there was a sacredness to how they interacted with nature, even how they hunted. They knew that they were going to go out and kill another being, and that they were going to sustain themselves and their families on that being. But they didn't look at it as a job to be done. They looked at it as a ritual in which they were serving not only their family, but they're also serving the animal kingdom in their way. And just because they walked their lives out differently doesn't mean that we don't have things in common, all right? So we're trying to be on this channel open, and we're not trying to be ignorant of the fact that there are other people, other cultures, and that culture affects your ritual and how you act out your faith. But there are some of us who have more in common than not. Now, I also know that ecumenicism is going to be the way of the AC. That's going to be something that comes into play. When I relate to the Native Americans, that's more of a cultural appreciation for how they walked out their faith, and you'll see they do have their own hierarchy as well. So again, we should not be afraid of words, symbols, or even other peoples or groups of peoples. If we know them, we can either A, relate to them, learn from them, be in harmony with them, trade with them. And Native Americans, they traded with their enemies all the time. And they would have seasons of peace and seasons of war, seasons of planting, seasons of harvest. Pardon me while I close my window. So what did they mean to Native Americans? In Navajo culture, an eclipse is about solemnity, not spectacle. It marks the end of a cycle and the power of when the moon and sun are in alignment. When the sun is blocked, it is undergoing a rebirth. It also is seen as the moon and the sun embracing one another. That's beautiful. And if you have any, and again, originally America was a Christian nation. I do look from that point of view, but everybody is welcome here. I don't welcome ignorance or hatred. Trolls just, I do call them out because that's what they deserve. Now, if you think about this, and this is what the Bible is, and whether you believe it or not, it is a very, very powerful book, because it not only teaches about our history as a species, and other species as well, I believe are in there. But it also teaches about farming, the cycles of farming, the seasons. It teaches about relating to the stars in the sky and understanding that when they were in a certain position, okay, that's when you plant. And then when they're in another position, this is when you harvest, right? And when they're in another position, maybe you move and relocate and you become a nomad because you don't want to wear out the soil in that area of all of its minerals, right? That's a big part of our problem today is we're not rotating where the crops are planted. So most of our food lacks nutritional value for us. I'm not a doctor. I'm not a nutritionist. I'm just someone who has made it my business to do my due diligence and educate myself. The disclaimers are in the description box. So if you think about it, the sun, S-U-N, passes away, right? And then is reborn. The same thing happened in the story of Christ. Now, there are people that say that's all the book is, that it's just telling you about the stars in the sky. And I would beg you to look around you at these patterns that are repetitive. As above, so below is a true statement. What happens above affects us. We even say it in the Our Father. So when I say let's find our common ground, that's what I'm talking about. Is even though we use different words, we're pretty much talking about the same thing. I'm not saying you have to be in best friends with that person or marry them or live with them. I'm saying you can understand them better, right? So maybe when you're walking down the street, instead of laughing and pointing at somebody and acting like an ignorant fool, smiling and saying hello and maybe asking them about their culture because it's beneficial to learn. So we can see that the parallel for Christ, the S-O-N, is displayed with the S-U-N, okay? Everything points back to history, his story. What did the Cherokees believe? Now, these are indigenous Americans as well. You have the Navajos, the Cherokees, the Chippewas, like there's a bunch of different nations, right? Now, think of that as star names, basically. You had Smiths and Jacksons and Moores, right? And Spencers, and so that's basically when you're of a tribe, it is your familial relations, right? These are the people that you make a community with. They're your family. Cherokee people have lore about a giant frog eating the sun or the moon during an eclipse. The story goes that before it was known as an eclipse, Cherokee people would see the sun or moon slowly disappear from the sky and it would dim. It was believed a giant frog or Walasi was eating the sun or the moon. Pagan tribes, yeah, not of Christ. That's not true, though. A lot of them have converted. Now, you have to remember, this is their viewpoints before any of them knew about Christ. There is a movement in the indigenous Americas about them converting. Not forcibly either. You can't force anyone to do anything and have that be effective. It's not going to work that way. And I replied to your comment, but we're not here to be ignorant to others. We're here to learn about them. I'm not saying you have to believe the same things. I'm saying, what can we take away from these people? I mean, can you make your own bread? Can you sit all day and grind your own flatbread? Can you take the wheat yourself without the help of machinery, with basic tools? They could. They can. You could learn that from them. Let us not be so ignorant. We don't know if they're all pagans today. We don't know that. And in Dante's Inferno, the pagans have a better place in Hades, and I mean closer to God, further away from the pit, than willful ignorance. Those who willfully are ignorant and in ignorance, or those who fall away and are apostates. Now, because we know better, we are expected to act better. So I would ask that you portray yourself as adults when you're on this channel. They may be pagans, but do you understand that most Americans today are pagans? Even those who claim Christ are participating in pagan activity. You cannot mix truth with error. I'm not mixing truth with error. That's not what I'm doing. I'm a Christian. I prayed before I started this video. I am not here to be ignorant. We're looking at their culture, okay? Their culture is different than their faith, and we're looking at it to see what can we learn from them. I'm not saying that I'm going to worship the gods they worship. I'm not telling you to. And in fact, I would warn you away from anything like that. Do not go worshiping these little g gods because they are in fact fallen angels. Don't do that. And I just said that as well. There are a lot of Americans out there who are pagans and they don't even realize it. And you need to have more kindness and charitability. If you're supposed to be a Christian, we need to be better reps for Christ so that people say, wow, I want to learn from them. I want to learn from the Native Americans about their skill set, about how they grew things. Do you know that the Hopi prophecy is almost exactly the same as the book of Revelation? God comes to people in the level of their understanding. I'm not going to judge your salvation. I'd appreciate if you didn't judge mine or anyone else's. We're not here to worship pagan gods. We are here to learn from our ancestors and not to worship them either. Obviously, you're a young Christian and you're not understanding of that. We are to be charitable. We are to be kind. And yes, we are to tell the truth. I'm telling you not to worship what they worshipped. They know that these are stories that they told to better understand the workings of the universe. Yes, we are called to be set apart. And this channel, if again, you are judging unrighteously, and Christ warns us against that, and I need to stay on topic. The reason I'm doing this is because of behavior like that. We need to walk this out better. When Christ healed the leper, did he ask him what religion he was practicing? No, he didn't. When Christ met the woman at the well, did he tell her she was damned? No, he didn't. Judging unrighteously is when you judge someone without any information or enough information. You don't know anything about me. You do better to just sit still and be quiet. You came to this channel. You don't have to be here. And I'm flat out telling you, let us not worship as they did. Let us not worship fallen angels or these little g gods. But let us look back and learn from their mistakes in history, just like the Holocaust. We talk about things so that they're not repeated, so that we can look at even the crucifixion, so we can look at that and say, let us never behave like that again. Let us look at what we are capable of and never do something like that again. There are people out there wanting to start a holy war at this time. I'm not going to tell you if that's good, bad, to do it, not to do it. That's not my job here. I'm staying in my lane. My job is to point to Christ, and the best way I know to do that is to reach out to a bunch of different people and to say, look, you have this part right already. You have this. This is pretty close to what we're doing over here. But now look at Christ. He did all of these things and walked every part of it out properly. Judging unrighteously is judging without enough information. And if the channel gets no likes or it gets no views, that's not my goal. My goal is to bring truth. Now, I teach you how to pray. I've taught people how to pray in Latin who have been open to it. Let us not judge in that way. We are not God. We cannot judge another's salvation. I'm not telling you to be in communion with these other people. I'm telling you we live here with these people. We don't have to be constantly at war with one another. We're supposed to be more spiritually evolved at this point and not repeating the mistakes we made in the past. So again, don't take what I'm saying out of context. I'm flat out telling you not to view things from this religious point of view. But if you're going to hold that tone, then anything you watch, anything you buy, anything you eat, anything you put in your home, who you buy your home from, they all better be of your same tribe then. They all better be true Bible-believing Christians. Or what are you doing here? We are walking this out the best way that we know how and the best way that we can. And if the channel gets no views, that's not my concern either. My concern is for the few people out there who want to repent, who want to understand that all this technology is not good for us. These people knew what they were doing, and they were warned to steer clear of technology. The Hopis were. Now, I'm not saying all technology. I'm saying we shouldn't be communicating with each other only with electronics. I'm telling you that these apps are misleading, that they are ruining families, because I had it happen to mine. Not with just bad behavior either, with purposeful, intentional misdirection. Meaning I'm talking to my family, I think, but I'm talking to a bot. These people, these Indigenous Americans, they have skills we need. We need these skills. Trust me. Can you fish? Can you feed your family if they go hungry? What are you going to do if the grocery store shut down? What are you going to do? I'm trying to learn the most that I can. Let us not judge unrighteously. We are to point to Christ. We are to point, actually, Christ pointed to the Father. He is the only one that come down here and gave us a bridge. He is the bridge to the Father in heaven. There is a hierarchy, though, and the angels have their place, as do the fallen ones. But those waters are muddy. We go right to the source now, and that is Father God in heaven. So please don't call me a paganist again. Ignorance, nothing but ignorance. Cherokee people have a story about, and we know this. We know there's no giant frog up there eating the sun, don't we? It's a story to better understand the workings of the universe. It doesn't mean you can't read it. It doesn't mean you have to believe it. I'm sorry, I have a very low tolerance for ignorance these days, and that's ignorance. Every time I turn the comments on now, it's nothing but beratement. We need to spend our time looking in the mirror and changing our own self in our own ways. Before we dare to point to anybody else, we take the log out of our own eye first. I will always point to God. That's what this whole channel is about. That's what my testimony is about. And I've lost much for it. And I call it all joy because I've been brought closer to God. And I hope that these days I'm setting a better example for how He wants us to love our neighbor. He didn't say love only our Christian neighbor. He said love our neighbor. Period. Ignorance. Excuse me, I had to take a sip of my orange juice, and I call it nectar from the gods jokingly. I'm not a pagan. The story goes that before it was known as an eclipse, Cherokee people would see the sun or moon slowly disappear from the sky, and it would dim. It was believed a giant frog or Walasi was eating the sun or moon. Now, we know that's not true. We know we're not actually worshiping the sun out there. But humans like to worship things. It's what we do. It's what we're built for because there's a hierarchy, right? Now, and this reminds me, if you have children, if you're a parent, and you obviously understand the hierarchy better as a parent, it is just brings with it a certain maturity that you start to understand, hey, loving parents discipline their children. It's just what you do as a loving parent. You set boundaries for them, because if they go outside of those boundaries, much like the fairy tales, when you go off the path in the woods, like today, missing 411, when you go astray, bad things happen, right? When you go off that path. But it reminds me of Littlefoot, the Great Migration, I think it was, with the little dinosaurs, with Littlefoot and Sarah and Ducky, and all of the dinosaurs, all of the long necks, all of the brachiosauruses, they all get this idea that they need to go migrate, right? And they go to this place, and basically you can tell that a crater had once hit this spot because they all formed this circle by the end of the movie. and there was an eclipse coming, and they reached their necks and their heads up as high as they could because they truly believed that for those few minutes of darkness, they were holding the sun in the sky so it would not fall. That's what they believed at that time, right? It's a beautiful story about instinct, about family, about tribalism. And again, tribalism is now, it is what we call family, right? It's your surname, it's your last name. And those used to be assigned very specifically. It came by either the area you lived in, the region in which you lived. That's how mine came along from France. Or it came by your vocation. If you were a blacksmith, the last name you took was Smith, right? I imagine that happened with population growth. Now, this is the part I want to get to, because this is the part I feel like we can especially learn from on this topic. And again, if you are someone who appreciates the topics that are covered, I would appreciate the thumbs up just so I know that these are topics you want to cover. And again, this was something voted on. Has nothing to do with paganism, okay? So really, I'm just going to start leaving comments off for the live streams if we can't be adults. Can Native Americans watch an eclipse? Eclipses evoke different beliefs among Native American tribes. For instance, among the Navajo, the Dene, the eclipse is a powerful astronomical event that should not be viewed out of respect. So they don't go outside and watch the eclipse. But let's get a little more into this. What is the Indian superstition about the solar eclipse? In India, with actual people from India, many believe that when an eclipse occurs, a dragon is trying to seize the two orbs. Now, again, you have this relation to astronomy. What happens in the heavens happens on earth. You hear this in the Our Father prayer, and it's also as above, so below. It's a truth. I'm not telling you to be of the occult. I'm telling you it's something they say that is truthful, and we say it too in the Our Father. So we have that commonality. There are common inherent knowings, I believe, that we are all born with, right? Inherent things that are just written on our heart. Like, it's wrong to murder people. You know this. Anyone that says they don't understand that it's wrong, you know it's wrong. You know it is. You're born with that knowledge that it's wrong. Okay? So it's like, in the beginning, some of us had this inherent knowing, right? But different families or different tribes or people who spoke different languages use different words to express what they're seeing happening in the heavens. And we know that the Bible says there's a war in heaven, so we fight it down here as well, a spiritual war. It's not with actual swords and guns, okay? So we do have this in common, and what I'm trying to portray as well is that we all have a common enemy. And that enemy is evil. It is wickedness. Even if people don't want to convert to Christianity, and I don't believe in forcing anyone, because that's not a true conversion. I don't believe in forcing anyone to a certain political belief, because that's not true. Eventually, if you force someone to do something, they will end up rebelling against that. It's not a good idea in any sense, for a parent, for a religious leader, a rabbi, anybody, for a tribal leader, to force anyone to do a thing. And the ones who lead this world, they know that. That's why they're so manipulative. And they know that they can't force our consent. What are superstitious beliefs about eclipses? Many still see them as evil omens that bring death, destruction, and disasters. Now, we already saw that there still are cults out there that worship the eclipse. And again, we weren't against that stuff here. We're supposed to be walking righteously, which means uprightly, right? And not to be wandering around like beasts with no ability to reason things out logically. And then, yes, we do take a leap of faith. All humans do. Even if you say you have no faith, that's faith. You have faith in nothing. Nothing is your God at that point. And I know it sounds weird, but all humans have faith. It's just how we're made. Some people have faith in numbers and letters. Some people have faith in words. Some people have faith in science. Some people have faith in politics, unfortunately, other men and women. So, a popular misconception is that solar eclipses can be a danger to pregnant women and their unborn children. In many cultures, young children and pregnant women are asked to stay indoors during a solar eclipse. Now, let me say this for a moment. That's also another parallelism, and anyone who writes understands what I'm saying. Again, let's be grown adults on this channel and go a little deeper with things. It's very hard these days. And I hang out on Jordan Peterson's channel and Bishop Barron's channel, and these people, they don't get this stuff in the comment section. They don't get this ignorance. Now, I'm sorry that I don't have a fancy degree. Actually, I'm not sorry. I'm a female. But I'm trying to fill a niche here, and I'm trying to fill a gap, and I was asked to do this. You don't have to be here. You don't have to listen to any of it. But this is, again, another parallelism. What happens when we see an eclipse? It literally is, for a moment, the sun is pregnant with the moon, and then it is no more. So that is another literary tool, okay? It's called parallelism. My enunciation and pronunciation is sometimes off, though I know the way the word's supposed to be said. Parallelism, okay? When you relate the S-U-N, for example, to the S-O-N, all right? What's interesting about this is we were just looking at the verses, not only in the Bible, but in other ancient books about the end times and pregnant women and it being a danger for them. Now, I've warned about this. I've told other people. This is a part of my testimony, too. There was a lot of talk of pregnancy in 2017, 2018 to me, about me. This is an impossibility, allegedly. I can no longer do that unless I have a certain procedure reversed. And let's not get into theological or medical debates at this point. The point is that I can't do that anymore, allegedly, unless it's godly, God-given. You would think your partner should know that. That's another reason I believe the things I believe. Something happened at the last eclipse because my family is not the same. And I don't recall going outside during that eclipse at all. I went outside and I saw the beginnings of it, but I went back inside. Now, my son was at school, and they didn't cancel school that day, and they all watched it. We weren't in the path of totality that time, but we did see the partial. And again, that's why I do this. So this topic keeps coming up as well, and this is why we're looking at other texts. It's not for me to tell you to become a paganism or to promote anything. It is to say, oh my gosh, these things are the same across the board. They inherently knew something that we lost today, that we no longer have. That's interesting. What do they symbolize? Supernatural apparitions, they believe them to be omens of impending doom, or that the sun was being attacked by hostile demons. It is for that moment, the power of the sun, the light is taken away from the earth. That's powerful. That's a powerful tenet for quote-unquote darkness. But we know that the sun rises again, the S-U-N and the S-O-N. Again, we see this parallelism. And you see this echo out in the butterfly effect. I've tried to display that on the channel. That's why I tell about my testimony, is because there are certain patterns that repeat over and over and over again in the background. Like, not having to do with your free will per se, but if you know they're there, you can start to avoid them and get out of this habitual negative behavior, maybe that you're in, that's causing yourself damage, those around you damage, like eating or drinking or smoking or anything. All right, so what I want to show you is, when I looked this up, this picture that I used for the thumbnail, I thought that was epic. I just think it's a stunning visual. And so I wanted to see what this article or link had to say. And it's from CBC News in British Columbia. And it's from, oh wow, it's from the last eclipse. I didn't even notice that, from 2017. Right before the last eclipse, sorry. So it says, Eating the Sun, How Solar Eclipses Changed from Terrible Omen to Torus Draw. Millions are flocking to see the sun disappear August 21st, my dad's birthday, but solar eclipses have a long history of terrifying Okay, of terrifying what? People? Okay, so let's read this real quick. This is a statue of Hoi Ni Hao, so Hoi, I think, a Chinese legendary hero who shot down 9 suns with his bow and arrow, is silhouetted against a partial solar eclipse in the Shaanxi province on July 22nd, 2009. I just thought it was a fascinating piece of artwork, and it tells a whole story, right, about how they see the eclipses as these sort of omens. So it says, as we prepare for the moon to swallow the sun, cast your mind, gosh, all this language. Now remember, again, like I said, these words and this terminology that all is allegedly from witchcraft, it was in the Bible first. Everything is God's first. The counterfeit kingdom tries to emulate that. Even us as men and women, we try to imitate the one who made us. It's just a trait in all children. Our children do the same. This is why we should be very careful of what we do and say in front of our children, because we are their forever example. And that's another reason I do this. Without warning, in central China, people in central China saw their familiar sun disappear and become a ring of fire in what today is called an annual eclipse. It only lasted 2 minutes and 52 seconds, but stories from that day, believed to be October 22nd, 2137 BC, were told for millennia, said Zhangshun Liu, a lecturer in Asian studies at the University of BC who has studied early Chinese eclipse records. People ran around beating pots and pans, and musicians banged drums, trying to scare away whatever had stolen the sun. Now again, there's a lot of ways our ancient primitive cultures were not so primitive in the way they lived, right? They knew more about the land and the sea and the crops than we do today. We could not hold a candle to these people. I can fish pretty well, especially for quote-unquote a girl. I got nothing on these people. Absolutely nothing. Absolutely nothing. Now, it says they were scared. They thought that something was eating the sun. Across cultures, stories of solar eclipses took different forms with a common thread, and that's what we're trying to pull at in this tapestry of humanity. We are trying to look at the common thread, because usually when you look at that common thread, it is truth. Because truth stands alone, it needs no defender, though we should defend truth and stand for it. It doesn't need us to, because it will stand on its own. Everything else will fall to the arrows and the torments of wickedness. Wickedness is against its own house. That's why it will fall. It is a house of cards, and it is an illusion. Truth will always stand, and that's why we pick at that thread of commonality, because there's some basic human truth there that goes beyond the borders of ethnicity, of family, and even of religion. Okay? And if we can find that commonality, we can have more harmony. I'm not telling you to worship with people who worship different. I'm not telling you to believe everything this person believes, but we are allowed to be individuals. We are allowed to be different. That is why we have free will. God is an artist and wanted us all to be different down here. He wants to look upon beauty. And for a long time, we have not been beauty. So I am sorry for getting sidetracked by trolls, but on this channel, they will get caught out because what they're doing is wrong. Now, I understand they think what they're doing is right, and they think they're being zealful. I was the same way once. But you're not going to get people to come to God or to see God if we are acting like that. And yes, there is no tone of voice in the typed word, which is why we must be even more careful and cautious of how we speak, because we never know when there's children about either. We have to be the light. We have to walk around as living gospels. We cannot say it came from this verse, this verse, that verse. We just have to speak it. Because the second you say, the Bible says, and it came from here, nobody's going to listen. Unfortunately. And my goal is just to get people to listen and hear at this time. Am I telling you to deny the Bible or Christ? No. I'm telling you to try different approaches. But I will never hide who I am from you, and I will never hide my own beliefs from you. And most of you know my history. If you followed the other channel, Buri and Jen, you know my sinful history and why I do this. So we can see there's a common thread that people often grew scared, or they saw it as some type of omen that meant there was something coming, either a season of tribulation or a season of blessing in certain ways from certain people. Oh, wow, okay. Beheadings and boomerangs. In the history of eclipses, there's a jarring disconnect between modern astronomy's precision, which can assign milliseconds to even 4,000 years ago. Okay, so I disagree with that. And records of human behavior, which drift into legend. There is a story, for example, of Indigenous Australians from the... Okay, I'm going to mispronounce that. Gadjuri? Is the N silent or the G? Nadjuri tribe, hurling boomerangs in the 4 cardinal directions, north, south, east, and west, to avert the evil of an eclipse. But since that account was written by an outsider anthropologist more than 100 years after the eclipse happened, it's hard to know how to interpret it. That's where we have to be discerning. Aboriginal societies are extremely complex and exist in a framework that is foreign to most Westerners. Yeah, they can be dangerous too if you... some of them. Again, I'm not going to get into blanket statementing whole groups of people. Okay, we all have wickedness in us. That's kind of why we're here, being refined like a piece of coal. By the end of this will be turned into a diamond. Sadly, many of us will not, because we will not reach for that free gift that we are being offered, which is salvation. And we need it. Look at our condition today. We just do, and people don't want to hear that. And I know that's why the channel isn't popular, but I'm okay with that. And I know that the Christians say, I'm too New Age or whatever. I was lost in the New Age. Yes, I use some of that terminology because I'm trying to reach those people and show them, hey, you're almost there. You're almost there. You're getting so close. Anyways, oh yeah, okay. So the most famous eclipse stories about the Chinese were written many years later. So let's... Oh, wow. It says, Z and he failed in their duty to predict an eclipse and were put to death, or so the story goes. Z and he have allowed their virtue to be subverted and are besotted by drink, reads a translation of the Book of Documents. Let them be put to death without mercy. The tale is noted by NASA and the New York Times, but we'll never know whether the drunken astronomers truly lost their heads over an eclipse. Okay. Now, again, I'm not telling you to worship them, but the ancient Babylonians, basically the pharaohs, were the fallen angels. They knew so much more about stuff than we do. I'm not telling you to worship them. I'm telling you not to worship them, but I am telling you to respect the hierarchy, because God still has the hierarchy in place and they still have a place here, and I only know this from experience. Don't go meddling where we should not be meddling, okay? However, with things like this in our universe that are clearly visible events that take place, I kind of want to know how they perceive them to be, considering where their origins, right? So ancient Babylonians are credited with early predictions, and I already told you about their reincarnation system, the fake resurrection system. I told you how that worked. Where are you going to find that information? Nowhere else. Unless other people today are starting to catch on, because they've hidden it. They will not talk about it, and they won't openly admit it. And they'll call me crazy for talking about it, and that doesn't bother me. Again, I think I've proved beyond a doubt that I have more intelligence than to just point at somebody and call them crazy, or point at somebody and call them a heathen. We're not supposed to be acting those ways. Even if it might be true, there's a better way to deliver truth, right? Ancient Babylonians are credited with early prediction, thanks to careful record keeping. Oh my gosh, they were amazing. They knew to put things in stone because they knew about the flood. They knew what was coming. They knew what was going to happen. And today, all of our digital information, if something happens again, like the Carrington event, we will be struck back to the dark ages because we don't have this skill sets within us. That's why I've been trying to encourage you to garden, learn about plants, grow a single plant or two in a container, It's been so hard for me carting these containers from room to room so they could catch the sun in the last few years. But I did it, and I learned something that I never thought I could learn. You can do that. Skills, they are something that can never be taken away from you, just like your faith. It can never be taken away from you. These are things that are hold value, right? And the what has the most currency here is your time, because the more time you spend with someone, the more you're serving them out of love. And we're to love each other. Christ didn't say just love other people who love me. He said love everybody. Love your enemy, he said. And yeah, he even said, if you do not hate your mother and father for the sake of me, I do not know you. Because yeah, there are days that I hate the people I love, because it's simultaneous. It's two sides of the same coin. Now, if you disregard somebody, that's true, like, you don't care what happens to them either way kind of thing. I only hate somebody in that moment because I hate what they're doing, right? Or how they're behaving, or I hate what they're saying. But disregard, I hate it for the sake that I love them, right? But disregard, that's entirely different. So ancient Babylonians are credited with early predictions, and they organized so-called Saros cycle when solar and lunar eclipses take place. Early skywatchers may not have understood what was happening, but just being able to forecast it was a pretty big deal. They represented tremendous power because people were in awe and fear at the prospect of losing their sun. Amazing. Okay, now we're going to switch off now. And we're going to go here to get back into the Native American cultures. We segued a little bit there, but again, there's information to be had. So beautiful. How beautiful. I've never been anywhere. Okay, so this is Arizona. For indigenous people, solar eclipse often about reverence and tradition, not revelry, right? So they're not having a celebration. Revelry means celebration, banging pots and pans, the type of thing some people do with the new year. Hold, please, while I get a sip of orange juice. I'm sorry. So Phoenix, for a few hours, Crystal Curley and her Indigenous women's work group took over a college auditorium to share traditional Navajo practices regarding that weekend's solar eclipse. So we're just going to skim here, okay? The links will be in the pinned in the comments, so if you want to go back, you can, and I'll probably pin a few extras. For the sake of time, this is, again, just to get people to understand and have something in common with their fellow man. You're not going to convert anybody if you can't get on common ground with them. So, again, to the heckler that was here in the beginning, let us learn together and let us be at peace with each other. They laid out books on Navajo astronomy and corn pollen used for blessings. I never heard of that. A medicine man fielded questions from the majority Navajo or DNA audience on what to do when the moon partially shrouds the sun. It says do not look at the eclipse, do not eat, do not drink, do not sleep, do not engage in physical activity. That's pretty much what I'm going to be doing, praying. Do sit at home and reflect or pray during what's considered an intimate celestial moment. Now, we are seeing a moment here that is the stars and the moon and the luminaries set in their position, in their estate, right? The fallen ones gave up their first estate. They fell from the sky. Or did they yet? How much of the Bible is actually prophecy or has not occurred yet? Or is it cyclical and these things repeat? Again, to me, science is the proof of God, and science has gotten to the point where they can predict these things. Now, I'm not saying anything definitely happens during these events, but I'm saying the pattern is there. We looked at the Carrington event. The pattern is there. So if eclipses come as warnings or omens, it is either to let us know maybe that we are coming into a season of blessing or a season of curse, a season of harvest or a season of planting, okay? Or a season of tribulation or a season of peace. There's so many things we're not supposed to do as Dene people compared to other tribes where it's okay for them to look at the eclipse. So not all indigenous peoples, just like not all of us today, or even there are indigenous people still, so excuse me, but even all of us as the melting pot that is America today, we all do different things, and that's the whole point. Culture and faith are two different things, and we might have very similar faiths, we just walk them out different. So it says it's not okay for them to be out doing things. The belief is pronounced on the Navajo Nation but not shared among the indigenous cultures North, Central, and South American that will be in the primary viewing path for the Ring of Fire eclipse Saturday. Yes, the Four Corners. Navajo, which has the largest reservation in the U.S., is closing well-known tourist destinations like Monument Valley and the Four Corners Monument to allow residents to be at home with curtains drawn in silence. Pause. There's a prophecy along with the Four Corners. And somebody, I didn't even know, I'd never heard of it. Didn't know what it was. I'm not well traveled, so I read a ton. I have traveled, but not outside of the U.S. and not to the Western U.S. The Four Corners allegedly is a plot of land that was given to indigenous Americans by quote-unquote the star people, the people who came from the stars. They said that they would be safe there and that they would come there to rapture them up, essentially, again in the future. So, for what it's worth, I just wanted to put that out there. Navajo-led tour companies, and again, are you going to be raptured up by the good guys or the bad guys? Because they look a lot alike. This is why we can't trust our eyes. The things flying around in the sky, do you know they're fallen ones? Or are they angels? Let us be careful with judging unrighteously. And that's what unrighteous judgment is judging a book by its cover, basically. Judging something by its dressing, its the skin tone, the language they speak, the color of their hair, if they wear glasses, if they have freckles, if they don't have freckles. All of those things are superficial, unrighteous judgments. And also, it's unrighteous to judge somebody that we barely know, that we just met. Unless you know somebody's heart, you can't. We can't judge another person's walk with God. We're just not allowed to do that. Now, we should be discerning in who we let into our home, right? I've gone over this ad nauseum. There is a balance to be had here. People will never want to go to Christ if we're not better reps for Christ. They will not come to him if they think he is a taskmaster. That is not Christ. That is the evil one, who is the taskmaster. That is why wicked never sleeps. Navajo-led tour companies also will cease operations, so they shut down a lot for the eclipses. In Navajo culture, an eclipse is about solemnity. Solemnity. No, I think you say the N when it's solemnity. There it is. Not spectacle. It marks the end of a cycle and the power of when the moon and sun are in alignment. When the sun is blocked, it is undergoing a rebirth. So again, Christ was crucified, died, was quote-unquote buried. He went to Hades to proclaim the gospel to all those who had died thus far and had not received it. And then he came back up and was reborn or ascended, right? Same thing that the SUN does, right? Everything is a tribute, and it points back to the Creator Maker. It is also seen as the moon and the sun embracing each other. That's kind of beautiful. Paul Begley, a Navajo cultural advisor for a tour company, plans to quietly sit at home in Page, Arizona. He said he was taught from a young age that deities are responsible for creation, starting with the first man and first woman who traveled through 4 worlds. And again, a lot of this goes along, if you've read anything about the Mormon faith, they have similar beliefs that there are different worlds and Christ is the ruler in this one, and that each one who is like Christ will get their own. I'm not saying you should believe it. I'm just telling you these are things that are common in regards to faiths and cultures, right? Christ says similar things in the Bible, but we're not going to get into parables today. We're looking at eclipses. He described an eclipse as a disturbance or death of the sun, which is considered a father figure in the Navajo. Out of respect, he said, all activity stops. It's just a show of reverency. And I think we've lost this. I don't know, as Westerners, if we've ever had proper reverence. That's one thing I am very grateful to for my grandma raising me, or I'm sure it was her who demanded I be raised in the church, is it taught me, I was such a tomboy and I still am, but prayer brings out some type of femininity in me that God placed, there with me because I'm a woman. But reverence is something we seem to have lost in worship. You have everybody calling all these different buildings churches and carrying on with all kinds of different blasphemous acts like pouring syrup on scripture. I wouldn't even do that to my enemies, like, faith or whatever book, just out of respect, unless I knew it was like satanic. But and then, trampolines in churches and, oh, my pastor's the best, our church is the best. Man, it's not about that. It's not about that. Of course, we're supposed to fellowship together, but we're supposed to be serving our neighbors and loving our neighbors and helping each other. We've lost something, and that's why I'm trying my best to allow that to be brought out of me, and trying to reach for information or parables or analogies that might spark something in you, the listener, to remember, my God, I am a created being and I am beloved. Now, if we create something like a robot and it breaks down, we throw it in the scrap pile. Or we recycle it, the parts and the pieces. We have that much wisdom. But today, when we toss them in a hospital or a nursing home and we forget about them. And I know this because I worked in them. Reverency is something that we have lost, and honoring our earthly parents as well. We have no reverency for the sanctity of life, for the sanctity of marriage and family and childbirth itself, and the sanctity of the female that God gave man. Women aren't supposed to be alone, but a lot of us are wanting to be today. We're not made that way. Women were specifically made to be a partner. Men do a little better alone. There's a reason for that. There's a reason we're not happy and we're not joyful, and it's because we don't have the love of the Lord, or at least we're not open to receiving the love of the Lord. Of course, the eclipse will subside in due time and activities go back to normalcy. So how long do they do this? Okay, the Lakota believe they descended from star people. Okay, that's what I was just talking about briefly earlier. Grew up finding stargazing compelling and wants to educate his children on the significance of the celestial alignment. And no matter how many people deny it, and I was just going to talk about this. You see the product they showed. The moon has everything to do with women's cycles. Almost everything. All right? Women are more lunar. Like, we just are. We're in relation to the moon. I'm not saying that we're more wicked or more dark. We have that. That's how we are made, right? Every being is made to operate in a certain and specific way. And when you stray out of that proper system of operations, much like a computer, you will start to err. And you will have errors. And you will not be walking in your true blessings and the true joy that you should have. Okay? Now, stargazing is awesome to do, just, again, to have that reverence come back into your heart and say, oh my God, I am here by a creator. This is why cities are dangerous in more ways than one. The light pollution doesn't allow for you to properly stargaze and see what's going on. Even where I live in a small town, and it's not as visible as I would prefer them to be, right? It allows you to look upon them and for a moment feel so small and insignificant, less than a grain of sand. And to say, but yet my Maker still hears me and sees me down here among all of this. So at one moment, you can feel small as a grain of sand, but as big as the tallest mountain because you are seen and beloved. So they get into how they are stargazers. The story that hold on. In Southern Oregon, The Klamath tribe's language department says no tribal tradition dictates that she hunker down. She will be part of an educational panel at running. Okay, so what? She's not limited. So the story she learned is that a grizzly bear is trying to eat the moon. Meanwhile, a frog jumps on the moon, and the moon decides to keep the frog as his wife so she can chase away the bear. The frog ends up married to the sun, too. Our people used to gather when these eclipses started happening, calling for the frog to come. When the eclipse is over with, then that's the frog being successful in chasing the grizzly bear. That's a Klamath tribe, okay? They won't be able to avoid the eclipse fanfare, blah, blah, blah. And yes, the sheer number of people that will come into small towns, even when you're respectful, you can cause damage. So I'm asking you, please, if you are traveling during this, please leave no trace behind. Please pick up your own garbage, trash, litter, dispose of it properly, recycle if possible. You should always try to do that. I'm moving towards more self-sustainable fabrics in my clothing, and I'm trying to learn more skills so that I don't have to be buying and consuming quite so much plastic in my life. So again, just these little things. Sometimes you feel like you can do nothing, and so you're paralyzed from doing even the bit that you can do. Start doing what you can, right? So let's be respectful. Let's not trample people's yards, people's homes, people's children. Let's watch what comes out of our mouth. Let's not have foul language because people's children, and because some of us are trying to stop that bad habit ourselves. Let's just be respectful of each other's space. And no matter what anyone says, nobody owns the land. Nobody owns the earth. You can say that's your home and that's your land and that you bought it. Okay. All right. Fine. But in the end, it is no more yours than it is mine. And vice versa. We should be sharing in resources. We should be more communal, not communistically, communal. We should willingly be to this point by now where we are spiritually evolved enough to say, we need to change our ways, America. But not just America. It's not just us, obviously. So in Oklahoma, the premier path of the eclipse, other tribes are recounting origin stories of eclipses. Okay, so the Muskogee, I apologize, Nation tribe, 66 tribal towns each have a unique story surrounding eclipses. The story he grew up with was that a rabbit was being chased by a little boy, transformed into a little person, and offered the boy 3 wishes. After food and friends, the boy asked for shade. So the little person lobbed cornmeal at the sun, covering it, and proclaimed the moon and sun have been brought together. The little person then teaches the boy a friendship dance. The eclipse represents friendship. During that time of the eclipse, we all pay homage, we all get silent, we all basically don't do anything during that time. But we also prepare medicines for that time too. There is old myths, and I wasn't aware of this. An old neighbor told me once that was teaching me a little bit about canning, and I already knew how to make the sauce. There are certain times when women aren't supposed to make things because they will not turn out right. Lo and behold, I ended up finding out he was right. So ladies, if it's your time, you might want to steer away from canning. I don't know why, but it wasn't, they didn't seal properly and it wasn't good. There are certain times for harvesting, like ormus water, and these are all things that you do from herbs that God gives us, right? There are teas and tinctures you can make. Wild lettuce, for example, is called the nature's opium because it's a natural painkiller. Now, it takes a lot to turn a plant into a tincture, but if you learn how to do these things, you'll learn that there are only certain times, much like planting and harvesting, there are a time for all things, right? We know people are hungry for traditional knowledge. I'm really thankful for our young people. So again, it's about what we can learn, not about pointing fingers. Like, we have to stop doing that. What do they symbolize? A disruption of the natural order, and many groups have believed them to be bad omens. Many ancient and not so ancient peoples had spiritual explanations for solar and lunar eclipses to help them make sense, right? Okay, so now I'm curious. And this will be the end of this video and maybe the beginning of the next. But I want to know, I want to know if the Sumerians wrote anything about it, right? Because we know they were also the fallen angels, the Anunnakis, Anukins, all the same beings, different names. They love to rename things, places, and themselves. They rename themselves all throughout history. Gilgamesh is so many different people. Nero. I mean, it goes on and on. Oh. A substitute king. This is wild because this gets into something I was looking at yesterday regarding Christ and how they've taken his kingship away. It doesn't matter what they do, it's what God does. But a substitute king. The ancient Mesopotamians also saw lunar eclipses as an assault on the moon. But in their stories, the assailants were 7 demons. Traditional cultures linked what happened in the sky to circumstances on the earth. I want to know about the ancient ways because they knew. They knew that things that happened on the sky were related to the shaking of, or the quaking of, or the titles of tides of the earth. The tides, the earth itself, can and will oftentimes be affected by these things. Now, the fact that we have a conjunction coming up with a solar eclipse, with the path of totality, going over the Madrid fault line, there's one with a solar maximum happening at that same time. Let us not be unaware. Let us not be willfully ignorant. Somebody commented, with everything, with everybody that knows about it coming, that means nothing's going to happen. What the heck kind of logical sense does that make? What does that mean? I don't I mean, I wish people would start explaining these things to me because I'm at a loss anymore with I mean, I hope it's bots. I pray it's bots that are saying things like this. I wanted to know what the Sumerians thought about solar... Oh, wait. It says about the real king would remain unharmed in the continuity of the state's policy. Okay, since the eclipses were predicted in advance, substitute kings were appointed who would bear the brunt of the god's wrath. The real king would remain unharmed, and the continuity of the state's policy was guaranteed. Wow. Now that's a gem, and I think we might have to look into that. Aztecs. We did not cover Aztecs. I apologize. 2 of these, in one pictograph of an eclipse, 2 of these demons are shown alongside the dark sun. The fear was that these demons of darkness would consume the sun and then come to Earth, bringing an end to the world as the Aztecs knew it. Which is ironic since so many groups of people just up and disappeared, isn't it? People aren't speaking these warnings for their health or for popularity or for clout or for monetary reasons because we have all been ridiculed and reviled since the last eclipse. We do this for the love of God and for the love of neighbor. That is why. All right, so next up, we're going to take a look probably at then Sumerians and Anunnaki, and we're going to see if there's any ancient texts that have reference to solar eclipses specifically. Unless something comes up. So I might do another little lifestyle video. I noticed something I had to add on to yesterday's vlog, and I don't know if it means anything, but I'll probably just attach it anyway. I do love you guys. I know I speak hard sometimes. I know that I don't have a big audience, probably because of that. All I can say is that we are not called always to be nice. Sometimes we have to get the truth across because, again, I would not be bothering people who did not come to me and first initiate a conversation. So I try to give them as much of the gospel as I can without declaring that. We are supposed to be living, walking, talking, breathing light, love, life, and showing people what it looks like to have the gift and receive the gift of eternal life. I love you guys. I pray for you every day. I would also appreciate prayer, the good kind. Okay?